turquoise Thunderbird soaring off the cliff didn't just become cinema history. It sparked a cultural revolution that terrified Hollywood executives and inspired millions of women worldwide. But the story behind that iconic car is filled with production chaos, destroyed classics, and a restoration tale that'll blow your mind. What you're about to discover will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about one of cinema's most legendary vehicles. 20. 5 cars died for your entertainment. Here's something that'll make classic car collectors weep. The production team didn't destroy just one 1966 Ford Thunderbird for that legendary final scene. They sacrificed 5 of them. But here's the kicker. Only one was the actual hero car used for close-ups with Geena Davis and Susan Sarandon. The other 4 were shells stripped down to their bare frames, filled with sandbags to control the flight path, and sent plummeting into the Grand Canyon. Director Ridley Scott wanted options for that final shot, so they rigged cameras at multiple angles and launched those beauties one after another until they got the perfect take. The production spent over $80,000 purchasing these Thunderbirds from private collectors and junkyards across California and Arizona. Each shell weighed differently, which affected how they tumbled through the air. The first 3 didn't flip correctly, spinning awkwardly before hitting the canyon floor. The 4th car gave them the majestic, almost balletic arc that made the final cut. That single shot cost more than some entire indie films of that era. 19. The color that almost wasn't. That stunning aqua blue wasn't the original color of any 1966 Thunderbird. It was a custom paint job specifically created for maximum visual impact on film. Production designer Norris Spencer tested 17 different shades of blue and green before landing on this exact hue, which he called Thelma's Freedom. The original Thunderbirds purchased for filming came in boring colors like beige, white, and forest green. Spencer knew the car needed to pop against the red desert landscapes of Utah and Arizona, so he worked with automotive paint specialists to mix a custom color that would photograph beautifully in harsh sunlight while still looking realistic. But here's the twist. Different Thunderbirds were painted slightly different shades because the paint reacted differently to each car's primer and metal composition. The hero car got 3 coats of the custom aqua, then a clear coat that made it gleam like a jewel. Modern restorers trying to replicate this exact color have driven themselves crazy because it shifts from turquoise to seafoam, depending on lighting conditions. Ford even considered adding Thelma Blue to their official color lineup after the film's success, but ultimately declined. 18. The stunt driver. They couldn't credit the person who actually drove the Thunderbird off that cliff wasn't a man. It was legendary stunt driver Bobby Bass wearing a wig and costume, and the studio refused to credit him properly because it would ruin the magic. Bass had performed stunts in over 300 films, but this was his most dangerous gig yet. He had exactly 2.3 seconds from the moment he gunned the engine to when he had to bail out through a specially modified escape hatch cut into the floor. The Thunderbird was modified with a steel roll cage hidden beneath the dashboard and seats, reinforced suspension to handle the rough terrain, and that secret trapdoor that Bass could dive through at the last possible second. Here's what's insane. Bass practiced the bailout sequence 47 times using a stationary car before they let him attempt the real thing. He wore 3 layers of protective padding under the costume, making him look bulkier than Geena Davis, which is why that final shot is filmed from a distance. Bass later said the scariest part wasn't the jump. It was hoping the harness system rigged beneath the car would actually catch him before he followed the Thunderbird over the edge. He earned $25,000 for those 2.3 seconds of terror. 17. The trunk full of secrets.
Okay.
Inside the hero. Thunderbird's trunk, the production team installed over 200 pounds of hidden equipment that never made it on camera, but was essential for filming those driving scenes. This wasn't just a normal trunk space, it was transformed into a mobile film studio. They bolted in a custom-built battery pack to power auxiliary lights that illuminated Davis and Sarandon's faces during night shoots without ruining the shots with visible lighting rigs. The trunk also contained a CB radio system that let director Ridley Scott communicate with the actresses during takes, backup film magazines for the mounted cameras, and a compact air conditioning unit that pumped cool air into the cabin through modified vents. But here's the wildest part. They installed a secret hydraulic system that could lower the car's rear end by 3 inches at the flip of a switch. This gave them flexibility in shots. They could make the car look more aggressive and muscular for chase scenes, then raise it back up for cruising shots. The actresses had no idea this system existed until midway through production, when a hydraulic line burst during filming, causing the rear end to suddenly drop and scrape the highway. That 3-hour delay cost the production $18,000, and they had to reshoot an entire day's worth of footage. 16. Ford wanted nothing to do with it.
Because I didn't ask him. I left him a note.
When the production team approached Ford Motor Company for support, promotional partnership, or even just permission to use their Thunderbird name prominently, Ford executives read the script and literally said, "Absolutely not. This film will destroy our brand." Ford was terrified that associating their luxury vehicle with a story about 2 women becoming outlaws would alienate their primary customer base, conservative, middle-aged men. They refused to provide any vehicles, technical support, or promotional consideration, forcing the production to purchase all 5 Thunderbirds through private sales and auctions. This backfired spectacularly when the film became a cultural phenomenon, and demand for 1966 Thunderbirds skyrocketed overnight. Within 6 months of the film's release, prices for these models tripled at auctions, and Ford dealers reported increased interest in retro-style Thunderbird concepts. The marketing department at Ford tried to capitalize on the buzz by rushing out Thunderbird commercials featuring women drivers. But the damage was done. They had already publicly distanced themselves from the film. Here's the kicker. A 1993 internal Ford memo surfaced years later, admitting that rejecting the Thelma and Louise partnership was the biggest marketing mistake of the decade. By then, the car had become so iconic that Ford couldn't reclaim any association with it without looking opportunistic. 15. Geena Davis actually crashed it. Twice. Geena Davis wasn't just acting behind that wheel, she was genuinely terrified because she'd crashed the hero Thunderbird twice during the first week of filming, and neither accident was scripted. The 1966 Thunderbird had no power steering, which Davis didn't realize until her first take. When she tried to make a hard right turn during a practice run, the wheel barely budged and she drove straight into a lighting rig, causing $15,000 in damage to equipment. The production had to halt for 6 hours while they repaired the car's front bumper and realigned the chassis. 3 days later, Davis misjudged the Thunderbird's acceleration during a desert highway scene and rear-ended a camera truck at 20 miles per hour. The impact crumpled the hood and shattered one headlight, forcing the crew to swap in parts from one of the backup Thunderbirds. Susan Sarandon later admitted she refused to let Davis drive whenever cameras weren't rolling because she didn't trust her behind the wheel of something that heavy and powerful. The insurance company threatened to pull coverage unless Davis completed a 3-day intensive driving course with a professional stunt coordinator, which delayed production by nearly a week. 14. The engine sounds are completely fake. Every single engine roar, rumble, and rev you hear in the film isn't actually coming from the Thunderbird. It's dubbed in post-production, using sounds from a 1969 Dodge Charger because the real engine sounded too wimpy. The 1966 Thunderbird came with a 390 cubic inch V8 engine that produced just 315 horsepower, which sounds impressive until you hear it in person. It purrs like a kitten rather than roars like a lion. Director Ridley Scott hated how docile it sounded during test screenings, so he brought in legendary sound designer Skip Lievsay to completely replace every automotive sound in the film. Lievsay recorded a Dodge Charger with a 440 cubic inch V8 engine, then manipulated those recordings to match the Thunderbird's on-screen movements. But here's what's hilarious. The Charger recordings were still deemed insufficient, so they layered in sounds from a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda and even a Ferrari 330 GTC for the cliff jump sequence. The final engine sound you hear is actually a Frankenstein's monster of 5 different vehicles blended together. Automotive purists who know what a real '66 Thunderbird sounds like immediately notice the deception, but for everyone else, it sells the illusion of raw, untamed power perfectly. The sound design alone cost $42,000. 13. The hero? Cars Resurrection. Story is insane. The actual hero, Thunderbird used for close-ups, didn't go over the cliff. It survived filming and spent 23 years rotting in a California impound lot before an obsessed fan rescued it and spent $200,000 on restoration. After production wrapped, the car was supposed to be returned to the private collector who'd sold it, but paperwork got lost and it ended up abandoned at a Los Angeles County impound facility. For over 2 decades, it sat exposed to the elements, its custom paint fading to chalky white, its interior destroyed by rats and weather damage, and its engine completely seized. In 2014, a Thelma Louise superfan named Janet Lauder tracked down the vehicle's VIN number through production records and discovered its location. What she found was heartbreaking: rusted panels, a collapsed roof, and windows so covered in grime you couldn't see inside. Lauder purchased the wreck for $8,000 and spent the next 3 years meticulously restoring every component to screen-accurate condition. She had to fabricate custom parts, remix the exact paint color using spectrographic analysis of production stills, and rebuild the engine from scratch. Today, that Thunderbird is worth over $600,000 and tours film festivals worldwide, proving that even Hollywood's discarded treasures can find redemption. 12. The insurance policy cost more than the cars. The production's insurance policy for the Thunderbirds was so expensive and complex that it cost more than all 5 vehicles combined, $120,000 for coverage that almost every insurance company refused to provide. When the production team approached standard film insurers about covering vehicles that would be intentionally destroyed, driven recklessly through deserts, and potentially launched off cliffs, they were laughed out of offices. 14 insurance companies rejected the policy before Lloyd's of London finally agreed to underwrite it, but with conditions that made the production coordinator quit in frustration. The policy required a certified stunt coordinator on set every single day, mandatory safety inspections of all vehicles before each driving scene, and detailed documentation of every modification made to the cars. But here's the absolutely insane part. The policy specifically excluded coverage for actress-caused accidents during non-stunt driving sequences, which is exactly how Geena Davis's 2 crashes happened. The studio had to pay for those repairs out of pocket, adding unexpected costs to an already tight budget. The policy also required the production to purchase a 6th Thunderbird as a backup reserve that would never be filmed or destroyed. It just had to exist in case something catastrophic happened to all 5 primary vehicles. That 6th car still exists today in a private collection, completely untouched and original, worth over $300,000. 11. The cliff location created a tourist nightmare. The exact spot where the Thunderbird went airborne became such a pilgrimage site that the Bureau of Land Management had to install barriers and warning signs because dozens of people died trying to recreate the scene. The final scene was filmed at Schaefer Trail Overlook near Dead Horse Point State Park in Utah, overlooking the Colorado River 2,000 feet below. Within months of the film's release, tourists started showing up by the thousands, and some absolute idiots actually drove their vehicles toward the cliff edge for photos. Between 1991 and 2003, 17 people died at that location, some from falls while taking selfies near the edge, others from attempting vehicular stunts that went horribly wrong. The BLM spent over $400,000 installing steel barriers, warning signs in 6 languages, and surveillance cameras to prevent tragedies. Local tow truck companies reported pulling an average of 3 vehicles per month from dangerous positions near the cliff edge. The park rangers now call it Thelma and Louise syndrome, the phenomenon of tourists losing all common sense because they want to recreate an iconic movie moment. One particularly disturbing incident in 1998 involved a couple who drove a rented convertible within 6 feet of the edge before their brakes failed, requiring a dramatic helicopter rescue that cost taxpayers $90,000. 10. The interior was a complete fabrication. The gorgeous turquoise interior you see on screen didn't exist in any factory specs. 1966. Thunderbird, the production team ripped out the original seats and dashboard, then rebuilt everything from scratch to match their aesthetic vision. Original 66 Thunderbirds came with black, white, or saddle brown interiors, none of which photographed well against the desert landscapes. Production designer Nora Spencer brought in automotive upholstery, specialists who spent 3 weeks creating custom seat covers, door panels, and dashboard accents in a complementary aqua blue shade that would create visual harmony in wide shots. But here's what's wild. The steering wheel you see is actually from a 1968 Thunderbird, because the original 66 wheel was deemed too chunky and masculine for the film's aesthetic. They also replaced the original gauge cluster with custom-made dials featuring larger, more legible numbers that would read clearly on camera. The carpet was hand-dyed to match the exterior paint, and they installed modern seatbelts disguised as vintage hardware because safety regulations required them. The original bench seat was replaced with bucket seats borrowed from a 1972 model for better camera angles during dialogue scenes. Every surface you see was touched, modified, or completely fabricated, making this Thunderbird an automotive Frankenstein that Ford purists absolutely despise. 9. Susan Sarandon bought a Thunderbird. Because of this film, Susan Sarandon became so emotionally attached to the hero car during filming that she purchased her own 1966 Thunderbird immediately after production wrapped, then sold it 6 months later because she called it a beautiful nightmare. During the 3-month shoot, Sarandon spent more time in that car than her trailer, eating meals in the front seat, rehearsing lines while parked in the desert, and even sleeping in the back seat during lunch breaks. She told interviewers the Thunderbird became her safe space on set, a cocoon where she could stay in character between takes. So, when filming ended, she tracked down a pristine 66 Thunderbird in Nevada, paid $38,000, and had it shipped to her New York home. Reality hit fast. The car had no air conditioning, got 8 miles per gallon, required constant mechanical attention, and was impossible to park in Manhattan. The final straw came when the engine overheated in bumper-to-bumper traffic, leaving her stranded on the Brooklyn Bridge for 4 hours. She sold it to a collector for $42,000, making a small profit but swearing she'd never own another classic car. Years later, she admitted the Thunderbird represented freedom and rebellion on screen, but in real life, it was just an expensive, impractical headache. 8. The speedometer never worked. During filming, throughout the entire production, the Hero Thunderbird speedometer was completely non-functional, which created massive continuity problems that editors spent weeks fixing in post-production using digital trickery. The original speedometer cable snapped during the second day of filming, when Geena Davis accidentally redlined the engine during a take. Rather than delay production to source and install an original part, which could take weeks given the car's age, the production coordinator made the catastrophic decision to just keep filming without fixing it. This meant that in every interior shot where the speedometer should show their speed, the needle sat dead at 0. But here's where it gets interesting. The editors couldn't just ignore this because attentive viewers would notice the discrepancy. They hired a visual effects team to digitally paint in speedometer movement, frame by frame, for 47 different shots, costing the production an additional $33,000. The process was primitive by today's standards. They literally hand-rotated animated needle overlays and composited them onto each frame using optical printing techniques. In some shots, if you watch carefully, you can see the needle movement doesn't quite sync with the engine sounds or perceived speed. This became such a notorious problem that film school editing courses still use Thelma and Louise as a case study in production mistakes. 7. A museum fought a legal battle for the wreckage. After the cliff jump, the mangled remains of the stunt Thunderbirds became the center of a bizarre 3-year legal battle between the Peterson Automotive Museum and a private collector who claimed ownership of the wreckage. When production wrapped, the destroyed vehicles were left at the bottom of the canyon because retrieving them would cost more than they were worth. The film's production company signed release forms giving up any claim to the wreckage, assuming it would just rust away in the desert. But in 1994, a scrap metal collector named Dennis Hogan hired a helicopter crew to airlift the remains out, spending $12,000 on the operation. He planned to sell parts to Thelma and Louise fans, but the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles caught wind of this and filed an injunction, arguing the wreckage was culturally significant film history that belonged in their collection. The case went to court, where both sides presented arguments about ownership, salvage rights, and cultural preservation. Hogan claimed he'd legally salvaged abandoned property, while the museum argued the wreckage's cultural value superseded normal salvage laws. The judge ultimately ruled in Hogan's favor, but he'd spent so much on legal fees that he sold everything to the museum for $28,000 just to break even. 6. The car's final jump required 18 safety inspections. Before they could legally drive the Thunderbird off that cliff, safety inspectors from 5 different agencies had to sign off on the stunt, and they rejected the setup 17 times before finally approving attempt number 18. The complexity of coordinating a car jump with a human bailout system meant every conceivable safety agency wanted involvement. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Screen Actors Guild Stunt Coordinator, the Utah State Highway Patrol, the Bureau of Land Management, and even the National Park Service because of the location's proximity to protected lands. Each inspection revealed new problems. The escape hatch wasn't wide enough, the roll cage wasn't properly welded, the harness system hadn't been tested at speed, the communications equipment wasn't redundant. Every rejection meant modifications, retesting, and resubmission, burning through 13 days of scheduled production time. The production spent an additional $67,000 on safety modifications and inspection fees alone. Ridley Scott was so frustrated that he threatened to film the stunt in Mexico, where regulations were looser, which finally motivated the agencies to approve the 18th inspection. Even then, they imposed restrictions: maximum approach speed of 35 miles per hour, mandatory medical helicopter on standby, and a complete dress rehearsal without cameras where stunt driver Bobby Bass proved he could execute the bailout successfully. 5. The desert heat destroyed 3 interiors. The brutal Utah desert heat was so intense that it literally melted the Thunderbird's interior 3 separate times, forcing the crew to completely rebuild the dashboard, seats, and door panels during production at a cost of $49,000. Filming took place during July and August, when temperatures regularly exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The custom turquoise vinyl used for the seats and door panels wasn't designed for that kind of sustained heat exposure, and the adhesive holding everything together began liquefying after just 4 days of shooting. The first meltdown happened during a scene where the car sat parked in direct sunlight for 6 hours between takes. Crew members opened the door to find the dashboard literally sagging and seat covers bubbling like lava. They had to halt production for 2 days while upholstery specialists flew in replacement materials and rebuilt everything in an air-conditioned tent. The second meltdown occurred during the police chase sequence when heat from the overworked engine combined with exterior temperatures caused the steering wheel cover to become so soft it left fingerprint impressions. The third incident destroyed the door panels when someone forgot to crack the windows overnight, turning the interior into a pressure cooker. By the end of filming, the production had gone through enough vinyl to reupholster 15 cars. 4. Geena Davis kept a piece. That's worth a fortune? Geena Davis secretly kept the Thunderbird's original steering wheel after filming Wrapped, and it's now valued at over $75,000 by memorabilia experts, but she refuses to sell it despite multiple 6-figure offers. On the final day of production, Davis asked the property master if she could take something from the car as a memento. He told her the studio had already cataloged everything valuable for potential auction, but if she could remove something small without anyone noticing, he'd look the other way. Davis waited until the crew broke for lunch, grabbed a tool set, and spent 20 minutes removing the steering wheel, which she smuggled off set in a duffel bag. She's kept it in her home for over 30 years, occasionally bringing it out for interviews, but never seriously considering selling. In 2019, a Hollywood memorabilia auction house offered her $250,000 for it, after a private collector commissioned them to acquire it at any price. Davis declined, saying the wheel represents the moment she became a true movie star, and no amount of money could replace that significance. The wheel still has visible wear marks where her hands gripped it during filming, bits of the custom paint on the spokes, and even a small crack from when she hit the lighting rig during her first crash. 3. 53. Replica Thunderbirds were built by fans. The film inspired such obsessive fandom that 53 screen-accurate replica Thunderbirds have been professionally built by fans worldwide, with some spending over $300,000 to recreate every detail down to the custom paint formula. Within 2 years of the film's release, automotive customizers started receiving requests to transform regular 66 Thunderbirds into Thelma and Louise replicas. The first documented replica was completed in 1993 by a Michigan woman who spent $89,000 and 18 months on the conversion. She hired paint specialists to analyze film stills and recreate the exact aqua color, commission custom interior work, and even track down period-correct accessories. But here's where it gets obsessive. Some replica builders have gone further than the film's production team did. One Japanese collector spent $412,000 creating a replica so accurate it includes the hidden hydraulic system, the fake escape hatch, and even replica safety equipment that was never visible on screen. Another builder in Texas installed an actual 390 cubic inch V8 engine pulled from a wrecked 66 Thunderbird to ensure authenticity, then never drives it because he wants to preserve its value. The most expensive replica sold at auction in 2017 for $685,000, more than double what an original screen-used hero car would cost. 2. The final scene. Almost killed the cameraman. The cameraman filming the Thunderbird's final flight nearly died when his safety harness failed and he dangled over the cliff edge for 11 minutes before rescue crews could pull him back to safety. Director of photography. Adrian Biddle wanted the perfect shot of the car going airborne, so he positioned himself on a specially built platform that extended 12 feet beyond the cliff edge, secured by cables anchored into the rock face. When the Thunderbird launched, Biddle leaned forward aggressively to track the car's flight path, putting maximum stress on his safety harness. The harness's chest clip suddenly failed, and Biddle lurched forward, catching himself only by grabbing the camera tripod. The tripod wasn't designed to support human weight and immediately started bending, leaving Biddle hanging partially over the 2,000-foot drop, while crew members screamed for help. His safety cable was still attached, but had twisted around the platform's support beam, preventing anyone from simply pulling him back. A stunt rigger had to crawl onto the unstable platform, secure a second safety line to Biddle, then carefully untangle the original cable while the entire structure groaned and shifted. The 11-minute ordeal was filmed by the backup camera crew, and footage shows Ridley Scott chain-smoking cigarettes while watching the rescue. Biddle later said he quit smoking that day, but started drinking heavily instead. 1. The real Thunderbird is still missing. Here's the bombshell that'll blow your mind. Nobody knows where the actual hero car used for the majority of close-up filming currently exists. It vanished from a locked studio warehouse in 1998. And the FBI investigated it as a possible theft worth over $1 million. After Janet Lauder restored what she believed was the hero car, automotive forensics experts examined the VIN numbers and discovered her car was actually backup unit number 3, used only for wide shots and stunts. The real hero car, the one where Davis and Sarandon filmed all their close-up dialogue scenes, was cataloged as stored in MGM Studios' prop warehouse in Culver City. But when collectors started inquiring about purchasing it in the late 90s, warehouse managers discovered it had disappeared. Security logs showed no authorized removal, surveillance footage had been recycled, and nobody could explain how a 3,000-pound car vanished. The FBI opened a grand theft investigation after the studio filed an insurance claim for $1.2 million. Theories range from an inside job by studio employees to a wealthy collector bribing warehouse staff, to the studio itself, quietly selling it and pocketing the money. 30 years later, the car remains missing. Some believe it's hidden in a private collection overseas. Others think it was destroyed to create artificial scarcity that drove up replica values. Until someone produces VIN documentation proving otherwise, cinema's most iconic Thunderbird remains one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries.